We have 5 angle grinder resistant locks that are currently available today. So we are going to test them with an angle grinder. And of course, they're all linked down below. We have now concluded testing and we're back in the studio, so it's time to go through what locks we tested, how we tested them, and what the results were. To be clear, the angle grinder test we carried out was over a period of 5 minutes of cutting time, with the goal being to get in as far as possible while using a high-powered battery-operated angle grinder, the kind one may expect a thief to potentially use. As you'll find out, some locks destroyed multiple cutting discs. So in those cases, we stopped the clock, changed the discs, and then carried on. The Litelok X3 is an angle grinder resistant lock, and it is rated Sold Secure Diamond for bicycles and e-bikes. Now, Litelok actually pioneered angle grinder resistant tech with the X1, setting a trend that was followed by brands like Onguard, Abus and Hiplok. The features of the X3 are that it is claimed to be 20 times more resistant than a standard U lock, and it's said to be made with Litelok's proprietary beryllium material, which is essentially a fusion of hardened steel and composite materials, which is said to offer enhanced abrasion, impact, bending and twisting resistance. It has a weight of 2.2 kilos and has a locking area of 195 square centimeters, which puts both metrics as third best on test. And it uses an alloy lock barrel for long-term key availability. The lock itself comes with 3 keys, so you should be pretty well covered. It has a silicone lock cover and a neoprene sleeve for storage. Now, when we were testing this lock, it's got to be said that it is actually very sturdy and there's very minimal play between the locking mechanism and the shackle. It has this soft touch eco rubber coating, which is great for frame protection, and it also just gives it a really nice tactile feel. When you look at the bottom of the lock here, you can see that there's some silicone which protects the keyhole, which is great for keeping water and dirt and grime out of the locking mechanism. However, it can make finding the keyhole just that little bit trickier, especially if you're operating in the dark. When it comes to mounting the lock though, if you're not someone who wants to carry this lock in a rucksack or pannier, you can buy a mount for it, but it doesn't come with the lock itself and does cost an additional £20, and it isn't great for small frames. But if you do have a larger size bike, it should be fine. On to the angle grinder test, and we could actually only cut a small way through into the X3. In our 5 minutes of cutting time, we burned through 2 discs and cut a third of the way through the lock. The Litelok was abrasive enough to wear down the discs, but the angle grinder did manage to keep on cutting. Now, this does differ to other locks, which when you cut to a certain point, the angle grinder would actually just kick back. Next up, we've got the Abus Granit Super Extreme. Now, this again is a Sold Secure Diamond rated angle grinder resistant lock. Despite being pretty heavy and large though, it's not actually intended to be carried in a backpack or carrier, as Abus emphasises its portability more than ease of transport. The lock itself uses wolfram carbide, which actually is just tungsten carbide, the second hardest substance after diamonds, for enhanced durability. It has a 27mm square parabolic shackle with a locking area of 220 centimeters squared. It weighs 2.1 kilos, which is the second lightest on test, 100 grams lighter than the Litelok, and the lock barrel itself is said to have a high resistance for picking and manipulation. The lock comes with 2 keys, which is the fewest out of all of the ones we tested, but replacements are easy to come by if you keep the code card. When we were testing this lock, it has to be said, it also felt very solid and secure, and there was no play between the shackle and the lock, and it has a very satisfying click once it's engaged. I think the sheer size of this thing is actually a really good visual deterrent because it is chunkier than the others that we've got. However, the coating of this lock is a much harder plastic, so probably won't be as friendly to bike paintwork. The extra locking reach of this lock is actually really handy if you're running something with a bigger down tube like an e-bike. When it comes to mounting this lock, The mount itself is actually very well designed and it holds the lock very securely and it doesn't rattle. Now, it can be a bit fiddly to fit and it's best suited for a pannier rack, but it can also be fitted between a chainstay and a seat stay. In use, this lock did perform very well, but unfortunately, the granite lost ground during our angle grinder tests. Now, we must stress that while the Granite SE did not fail our angle grinder test, it did show significant signs of lower performance compared to the others. During our 5-minute test, we only got through one disc and we were able to cut over just halfway through. Now, if we extrapolate that out with potentially 2 cuts required to remove the lock, the Abus would only need either 2 to 4 discs and around 20 minutes to remove it. The Abus is clearly resistant to angle grinders. However, in a group test where all locks offer decent resistance to angle grinder attacks, they must be ranked based on performance. If you encountered a very determined or well-equipped thief with the time and patience, the Abus clearly underperformed compared to the competition. Next up, we have the Hiplok DX1000. Now, Hiplok is known for blending style with security, and it's now tackling angle grinder resistance with this DX1000. Like the other locks, this is also a sold secure diamond rated lock, and it's designed for bicycles with thicker tubes like e-bikes and even motorbikes. This lock features a square profile, a graphene reinforced hardened steel shackle, and an anti-angle grinder security system. The locking area is even bigger than the previous two at 225 square centimeters. It weighs in though at 2.7 kilos, making it the heaviest lock in this test. This lock has a pretty significant rubber to metal ratio, and ultimately when you look at it from the outside, you can't actually tell where the rubber ends and the metal starts. Now, the locking mechanism that is inside here is reported to not have any picks since it was debuted back in 2021, which I've got to say, if true, is a pretty decent reputation to have. When we start to think about how much this lock actually costs, in the UK it's £300 and over in the States it's $350, I've got to say it almost feels a little bit underwhelming due to the noticeable play between the shackle and the lock, although Hiplok have confirmed that this won't affect security. The lock's heft has made it cumbersome and it is tough to transport without a proper mounting system, and it does require storage in a pannier or a backpack, but that does ultimately then take up a lot of space. Hiplok's rubber flap that covers the locking system is simpler than competitors and offers better visibility and easier key engagement, especially when you're bent over a bike rack in the dark. While the DX1000 didn't really stand out during usage, it also didn't actually cause any issues. That changed though when it came to the angle grinder test, as it stepped up and performed seriously well as it heavily resisted our attacks. We applied considerable force when we tried to cut into this lock, but ultimately it was the cutting disc which suffered as it quickly showed signs of wear. Holding the grinder steady proved difficult when trying to reach the centre of this lock, which appears to be a part of Hiplok's anti-angle grinder security system. Each time we attempted to reposition the cutting wheel, the coarse material kicked the grinder back. We managed to burn through 2 discs in our 5-minute test, but there was no way we would have been able to cut any further through the lock due to the kickback. Next up, we have the Onguard RockSolid 8580. Now, you might not have heard of Onguard, but it is a subsidiary of Magnum Locks, which specialises in security. This, again, of course, comes with a sold secure diamond rating, and it's designed to resist angle grinders. It has a 15mm hardened steel shackle with a patented rock-solid finish. It has a 1.3 kilo weight, making it the lightest in its class, but it does have a smaller locking reach. It has an X4P Quattro 4-point locking system, a Z cylinder lock barrel resistant to picking, pulling and drilling. It includes 5 keys, which is the highest among all of the angle grinder resistant locks that we've had on test, and the automatic key cover and rubberized coating do offer really good durability and weather protection. We think that it's got a really good quality feel with that soft rubberized coating and minimal shackle play. There is a slight bit of difficulty when it comes to aligning the lock when removing or engaging. However, if you just slow down, take your time, you will get there in the end. It has a smooth and consistent key operation once engaged, but the weather guard can be just a little bit tricky. The smaller locking reach may be tricky for crowded areas like transport hubs, but I don't think it will be an issue for less busy locations. The angle grinder test is where the Onguard RockSolid really shone. It was by pure coincidence that the Onguard was the last to be cut, and its resilience took all of us by surprise. During our 5-minute test, the Onguard barely showed a scratch. The patented rock-solid coating that's been applied to the 15mm hardened steel shackle effectively sanded down the cutting disc, launching plumes of grinded disc dust into the air. In well under the 5-minute time limit, we burned through 3 grinded discs, which is the most of any lock-on test. It was taking about 30 to 40 seconds for a disc to essentially evaporate into thin air. And when you look at it now, obviously, forgetting that big hole in the rubber coating, there'd be nothing to stop you from using this again. It barely made a mark. The Squire Stronghold D16 Max is a UK-made bike lock with a sold secure diamond rating, costing £289.99. However, its design has notable drawbacks that hinder usability and undermine its appeal. The lock's plastic cover feels flimsy, diminishing trust in the product's durability. Additionally, the lock body and shackle exhibit noticeable play, although this doesn't affect security. Despite its generous 209cm square locking area, the thick rubberized coating makes securing a bike fairly cumbersome. Weighing 2.7 kilos, it is one of the heaviest locks on test, and given its price point, the Stronghold D16 Max faces stiff competition from superior options like the Hiplok DX1000, which offers better reach, security, and a similar weight for just £10 more. Now, on to conclusions and my overall verdict on all of these locks. We're going to start with the Abus. At £260 or $320, the Granit Super Extreme 2500 is the 3rd most expensive on this test. However, considering that it includes the superb mount and the Litelok X3 requires an additional purchase, the Abus represents decent value. While there is some nuance in how well the locks perform during the angle grinder test, the Litelok X3 does outperform it, which means the Abus slips into 4th overall. For many, Abus is a known entity, and the quality of the Granit SE is second to none. So, if you like to travel light and keep the weight on the bike and not on you, there is absolutely no reason not to choose the Abus Granit Super Extreme. At £300 or $350, the Hiplok DX1000 is not only the most expensive lock in this test, but it's also the most expensive lock we have tested here at Cycling Weekly. For this cost, we expected it to stand out from the crowd and be the best, but the DX1000 does almost the opposite. It's understated and functional and just gets the job done. Now, while this isn't a bad thing, the DX1000's extra weight and the fact that it is £100 more expensive than our overall winner starts to make the Hiplok look like poor value. That being said, its performance in the angle grinder test was impressive, and provided Hiplok's claims surrounding their unpickable lock cylinder stand up, the DX1000 offers a very high level of security for your bike. With such a performance, the Hiplok secured 3rd place. Now, if it weren't for the exceptional performance of the Onguard RockSolid in the angle grinder test, the Litelok might have easily secured the top position. Although there is a minor difference of price of £50 or $50 between them, the extra reach and features diminish this disparity for those who need them. The extra expense of the tactical mount brings the X3's price closer to that of the Abus Granit. Nevertheless, its performance in the angle grinder test and overall quality surpasses competition from either Abus or Hiplok. And lastly, given the sheer amount of security that the Onguard RockSolid offers against angle grinder attacks, you may be surprised to learn it's the cheapest on test at £200 or $250. That's £50 or $50 less than the next cheapest, the Litelok X3, and a massive £100 or $100 cheaper than the Hiplok DX1000. While we are awarding the Onguard the title of Best Overall Angle Grinder Resistant Lock, it could also be Best Budget, Most Secure, and Most User-Friendly. This shouldn't reflect badly on the other locks in the test though, as they all performed well. None failed the angle grinder test and all offer similar specs and retail prices, but the Onguard RockSolid stood out in a field of outstanding performances, having that little extra something to give.